What's going on, guys? It's your boy Zach No C here, and today we are going to be taking a look at this brand new Brockhampton album, Roadrunner. New light, new machine. Let's get into it. This is the 6th full-length album from the best boy band since One Direction, Brockhampton. I first became familiar with Brockhampton back in 2017 as they released each installment of their excellent trilogy of albums, Saturations 1 through 3. Their rise was unprecedented and meteoric. Honestly, following it as closely as I did was one of the most exciting time periods I've ever had in my life as a music fan. The albums that came of it are among some of my favorites ever released, and I'll never forget the day that I came across the Gold music video on the Hip Hop Heads subreddit, and I just knew that these guys were going to be something special. However, things did start to get a bit rocky for the group after signing to RCA Records at the front end of 2018. With the departure of founding member Amir Van shortly after inking their contracts as the result of some sexual assault allegations coming to light, the group's two follow-up albums, Iridescence and Ginger, both received admittedly more mixed reactions from their fan base than the amazing trilogy that they broke out onto the scene with. Many fans felt that without the grit that Amir brought to balance out a lot of the vulnerability that Brockhampton is known to speak about in their work, that the overall quality of the music suffered. The group was also very evidently still processing the loss that they had just experienced, and understandably, the youthful exuberance that was really prevalent in the original trilogy of albums had been traded in for a much more depressed energy. As excellent as Iridescence and Ginger were, in my opinion, in spite of all that, I do have to admit that I was among the many who somewhat longed for the good old days to return, at least to a degree. It is incredibly hard to top a legendary run, and even if Brockhampton had never ever topped what they did on the Saturation trilogy, I still would have been perfectly satisfied with what we've been given. Over time, I had to come to terms with the fact that as much as a new Brockhampton album would always excite me, the likelihood that I would ever love any of their later work as much as I did that original trilogy of albums was rather low. My love for those albums has really transcended the music itself, instead being the anchor point for some of my fondest memories that I've ever made as a music fan. Once an album really penetrates your soul and becomes a part of you like that, it becomes nearly impossible to be objective towards the work that succeeds it. And yet, in spite of that, here I am, in front of this camera with all of you guys, facing the fact that somehow, some way, Brockhampton has done it again. I genuinely can't believe that I am saying this, but it's true. Brockhampton has succeeded in releasing their most ambitious, meticulous, and powerful album to date with Roadrunner. I won't mince words here. This album is everything that I could have possibly wanted from Brockhampton's work post-Saturation trilogy and more. It melds all the best qualities of their previous work and elevates the group to an artistic height that they have never before occupied. For the first time ever, they've incorporated several rap features into the songs here, which really helps to bring some more variation and return some of the grit that they had lost with Amir's departure. That being said, this album feels nothing like the lightning in a bottle that very much was the Saturation trilogy. Instead, it feels planned, focused, intentional, and masterfully executed. The group members themselves are also experimenting more than they ever have vocally, and in turn end up sounding more like professional vocalists than they ever have. Unlike previous albums where the majority of the group would provide vocals to each track, they've instead opted to split up the vocal appearances, allowing one or two members to occupy the spotlight instead of everybody all at once. As a result, every single member gets their own opportunity to really shine and get out of their comfort zone, and the results are absolute fireworks. Now, on the instrumental side, the beats are among some of the most well-rounded that the boy band has ever constructed. From the dizzyingly experimental BUZZCUT to the glam rock aesthetics of What's the Occasion or the G-funk-laden Windows, Kiko, Ramil, and Jabari have absolutely outdone themselves on the instrumental front of this LP. Somehow, even though the instrumental palettes on this album are so diverse, they've still managed to stitch it together in a way where everything comes off feeling more cohesive than they ever have regardless. Conceptually, I'm inclined to call this Brockhampton's most diverse record. The group hasn't completely shaken off the difficult emotions that they were processing on Ginger, but instead of letting that grief debilitate them, they've much more successfully channeled it into powerful and compelling songwriting. Throughout the tracklist, they explore struggles with self-acceptance and exhibit war cries against police brutality, gun violence, and homophobia. At other times, they boast about their triumphs and their achievements, leaving me feeling energized after every verse. However, the most prominent emotional anchor point on the album is Joba's reflections and tributes to his late father, who unfortunately committed suicide in September of last year. This resonates most blatantly on parts 1 and 2 of The Light, each featuring their own verse from Joba opening up about the existential crisis that he has been feeling since this tragedy only a few months ago. Part 1 is backed by this explosive and sinister guitar-heavy instrumental, with Joba exposing the imagery that he sees in his mind of blood spread across the walls and skull fragments in the ceiling of the room that his father died in. The entire verse is absolutely heartbreaking and harrowing, and for many fans it was extremely hard to listen to, myself included. Kevin Abstract spits a verse in the back end about overcoming homophobia and the several difficulties and challenges that he has faced since rising to fame. And as exhilarating as his performance on the track is, it really is Joba who steals the show by crafting one of the most intense and powerful moments in Brockhampton's entire discography. As heavy as some moments are in the tracklist, though, there are still plenty of others that do feel like a party. The posse cut Windows is just this 6-minute behemoth featuring a verse from every single vocalist in the group, with a feature from SoGone, SoFlexy kicking everything off. The laid-back G-funk instrumental with some world music elements mixed in is really the perfect backdrop for this kind of track, and almost reminds me of something right out of the DJ Quick playbook. And it keeps on morphing and progressing throughout the song with multiple instrumental switch-ups. I gotta give a shout out to Don McLennan specifically on this one though. His verse is just so wild and off-kilter with just a crazy cadence that I've never heard from him, and it's one of his most enjoyable verses and one of the best verses on this entire album. I do think Windows overstays its welcome just a little bit. It is one of the less ambitious topical moments in the track list, and it really does feel like a 6-minute song by the time you hit the end, but it's still a really enjoyable song, and in no way am I trying to make it out to be a blemish. It is really incredible. The group has also finally released the long-teased Bankroll with A$AP Rocky and A$AP Ferg, the latter of whom ends up delivering one of his best verses in years. It's just crazy to me that somehow, even after being teased for so long, this song really still managed to live up to the hype that it has been building for all these years. A new version of Chain On also appears in the track list here, a song that initially released as a different version during their Technical Difficulties radio live streams last year. If you read my top 20 albums of 2020, you would know that the Technical Difficulties radio unofficial mixtape was one of my favorites of last year, and Chain On Hold Me was one of my favorite singles. The song still features the standout verse from JPEGMAFIA kicking it off, but the Hold Me section that made up the track's second half in the original version has been replaced by an absolutely insane verse from Don McLennan. I do enjoy the new version a lot, and I still think that it is one of the best tracks here, but with the original version being one of my favorite songs of 2020, I do have to admit that I missed that beat switch section just a little bit. The show-stopping Don't Shoot Up the Party is this amazing high-energy banger that manages to fit in subliminal messages speaking out against gun violence and self-harm amongst an earworm hook and some very danceable verses. Kevin's intro to the track is a contender for one of the best on the entire LP, and Matt, Joba, and Bareface all contribute their own incredibly entertaining refrains. The song recaptures the magic of the original Saturation trilogy more successfully than the group has in almost 4 years now. In fact, there are several moments on Roadrunner that really feel like Saturation perfected. Count on Me, Old News, When I Ball, they all sound like they would fit snugly into any one of those three track lists if they were just a little bit less instrumentally dense and a bit rougher around the edges. They even brought back the classic Saturation 3 era rewind sample for this album. Yeah. As brilliant as those songs are, though, I'll Take You On featuring Charlie Wilson really is the golden goose as far as Saturation era comparisons go. The track picks up right where Saturation 3's poppier moments left off, with a synth-heavy dance beat, hands down one of the best hooks on the record, and a lovesick concept straight out of that era. Charlie Wilson doesn't play a massive role on the song, but I really do enjoy his background vocal contributions and the outro that he has placed here. It adds another layer of captivating depth to an already seductive sonic landscape, and the result is really one of my favorite tracks on the entire album, if not my favorite. All in all, I know I've spent nearly this entire review just straight up praising this album, but somehow I still come away from it feeling like I've undersold it to you. This may just be the recency bias talking, but I really have to admit that when I listened to this album for the first time, there was one word that kept coming to mind after every song. Classic. The album, weirdly enough, gives me the same emotional response that I get from listening to some of the most acclaimed albums of all time. It's not entirely perfect, as I did mention. I do think Windows is just a little bit long, but outside of that single critique, I genuinely adore every single quality, performance, and moment on this LP. The lighter moments in the track list, like Chain On and Old News, are balanced so perfectly against songs like What's the Occasion and The Light Part 1 and 2. I just genuinely don't think words can accurately describe how genuinely special I believe this album to be, both from the perspective of a Brockhampton fan and a music fan in general. This thing is immaculately produced, fantastically written, brilliantly performed and constructed, and all in all really exhibits all of my favorite traits that I could ever want from Brockhampton, all under one umbrella. As of right now, this album is my #1 for 2021 so far, and honestly, unless some kind of crazy masterpiece just spontaneously manifests within the coming months, I can nearly guarantee that Roadrunner will hold that #1 spot throughout the year. When I started writing this review, I really wasn't ready to call this album my favorite in Brockhampton's discography. I thought that simply the experience of living through the Saturation era from the very beginning would forever outweigh anything that the boy band could ever follow it up with. And yet, here I am, after getting my thoughts down on paper and reading the words back to myself in the writing process of this review, I realize that the boys have really done it. I've seen Brockhampton live multiple times, and at every single show at some point, Kevin Abstract jumps on the mic and screams out, "The newest one is the best one," to try and get the crowd hype. When I watched the Live from the Chapel concert that they live streamed last week to celebrate the release of this album, Kevin Abstract predictably proclaimed, "Sixth one is the best one," during the Chain On freestyle, and honestly, I am thrilled to say that for the first time since 2017, I genuinely believe him. Yeah, that's right. This is it. This is Brockhampton's best album yet. So, with that being said, my final score for Roadrunner New Light, New Machine is... Thanks to everybody who watched the review. If you like what you saw, please be sure to drop a like and join the conversation down in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and hit the bell to get notified anytime I upload new videos. Also, make sure to follow me on Instagram @_NoCNotes for access to all of my exclusive live streams and other content. In fact, I hosted a watch party on my Instagram for that Live from the Chapel Brockhampton concert that I had mentioned a little bit earlier on in this review. So, if that's the kind of thing that interests you, make sure you follow me @_NoCNotes so you don't miss any future live streamed events. I appreciate you coming by, guys. Thank you for watching NoCNotes. My name is Zach NoC. Stay hydrated, and I will see you guys for the next one. Peace.